Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, here we are with no
hmm
shortage. Once again, no shortage of
Zero
conversation.
shortage. Yes, I just got back from a run, so I apologize if
Uh-huh.
anyone's watching this. I'm looking a little flushed but it is my stress management tool, and so I
We
gotta
need
keep doing
those.
it. Yes,
Yes,
yes.
we need those. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, good for you. Well, look, I'm not going to help with your stress with this word of the week here, Lisa. So let's just go ahead and dive right in here. So the word or the concept of the week actually is kind of a 2-for-1 deal here with you
hmm
all. We have autocracy and authoritarianism. And both of these words, ironically, Lisa and I were thinking about on the production side of things, what
hmm
word of the week would work, but it doesn't necessarily have to square neatly with the topics we're talking about for the week.
hmm
But we kind of stopped in our tracks on these two because we did not want to take for granted that you all knew what each of these words meant. So let's kind of take a step back and define these. So, autocracy is a state governed by one person with absolute power. Absolute power. It's the one of one, if you will. And North Korea would be an example of a one person autocracy that has absolute power and is not to be challenged, let's say. But then here's the very, very gray, faint, almost non-existent line between autocracy
hmm
and authoritarianism. That would be more like a China situation where there is, instead of one person, one party or one small limited group of people. So there's limited power for political power for citizens across the board, but the power is concentrated centrally across a very small group that are usually the ruling elite party for several reasons. Um, Whether it's for money, like it seems to be here in the United States, but they do have some key features, key characteristics within authoritarianism where dissent is truly suppressed in lots of different ways, and we'll get into a little bit of this later, especially when it comes to voting rights. But suppression of dissent, even suppression, I would say, Lisa, of protest would fall into
Yep,
that
yep.
category. Few, if any, checks and balances, lack of accountability, controlling elections. Propaganda, and of course, using disinformation to their advantage. All of this sounds eerily familiar
hmm
to our day
hmm
to day since January, what have you, of this year, right, Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these words get thrown about a lot, and they are very
Yeah.
close together, right? So, like,
Yes.
Kim Jong
Hmm.
Un in North Korea is an autocrat, but there's
Right.
also authoritarianism, right? So there's a
Uh-huh.
lot of that's why I appreciate you saying that it's a thin line, and then you've got all these other words, oligarchy that we did before. You've got
Hmm.
kleptocracy, you've got totalitarianism, and they're all kind of like they're all a
Yeah.
basket of all of the bad stuff that we're starting to
Yes.
see here, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost it's not just power, but the ways in which power shows up for smaller and smaller groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
almost feel like there's probably a visual out there that we haven't found yet, Lisa, that shows this concentration of power and kind of the gray area that still is, to, in my opinion, very opposite of what the framers were creating here in the United
Right, right.
States. So I haven't found a visual for it yet, but in my mind, I see something that's graded, but multiple grades of gray, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
around the
Mm-hmm.
centralized power. So
Yeah.
anyway, hold that in the back of your minds, y'all, as we continue to talk about these other topics, whether it's this episode or others. But this is what we are seeing in real time. And Dr. Lisa warned us in previous episodes before that this isn't something where someone rings a loud bell and says, "Hey, we're here. We're in an autocracy. We're in authoritarianism. We're in fascism." It's not a loud bell that just goes off
Right.
because it's happened immediately. It's a slippery, slippery, slow slope that moves in such a way that it's almost unnoticeable. But the people that are noticing, we are ringing the bell.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to highlight what's going on in very real but slow time. So
Mm-hmm.
here we are. But let's get into phase one. So, Lisa, I think it's a natural transition that we didn't plan to go from talking about
Yeah.
autocracy, autocrats, and authoritarianism into panic. Hello.
Oh my.
But I thought it was important for us to talk about this particular article that popped up from the New York Times in my feed. And I'm gonna bring you back, then bring you forward, Lisa.
Okay.
So about a month ago, um, I was talking specifically to my therapist about lots of things, but one of the things that came up was folks feeling that they are not prepared for the uncertainty of
Mm-hmm.
this political administration. We're just talking broadly about not being prepared.
Okay.
This was before tariffs had officially come about, but we just felt this uncertainty. And so, people are stockpiling their needs. They are planting and flourishing their gardens. They're doing lots of different things to at least lessen the blow of the uncertainty around lots of different things that have been sliding down this slippery slope of uh, uncertainty, disillusion, fear, lack of access, all these different things that we are starting to be shaken up a bit to remind us that we can't just assume that certain things are going to be available to us. One of the simplest things that has been overblown in lots of different ways. These damn eggs, Lisa. Okay, for people that eat eggs, everybody was all, bringing this up as a point to vote upon back in November. And, I go to the grocery store one week and eggs are $3 a carton. The next time I go, they're $8, $9 a carton. And so they stay there. Well, if I were back home and I was near a farm and there was plenty of hens in a hen house, I wouldn't have to worry about such things, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, given that, this preparedness that I was talking with my therapist about has now transitioned in my brain, and especially after reading this article, into an understanding of panic and what's
Okay.
called an entire panic industry. Because, hello, Lisa, we're in the United States of America. We can capitalize on anything, right? Including people's panic. And so the article talks about the quote unquote panic industry, where businesses are literally capitalizing on widespread fear, anxiety about lots of different things collapsing. So whether it's food supply, whether it's gas supply, whether it's, for example, I had a very frank conversation about my son's medications. What if they're not available anymore? Then what do we need to do in order to be prepared? Well, we need to change
Mm-hmm.
some nutritional things. So there's an entire industry that has been built around panic, Lisa, which means that for people that have lots of money, they're building underground bunkers underneath their homes or installing very high-tech security systems to protect them within their homes. Lots of different things are happening here. And so, Lisa, I read this entire article and I am still trying to hang out in the prepared versus the panic conversation. But Lisa, what do you think about this whole notion of a panic industry and possibly even if you feel comfortable sharing, if you've even thought about this and how you would even prepare versus panic when it comes to where we are right now?
Mm. It's interesting because I feel like the panic industry has been around for decades, right? And it makes me think about
Mm-hmm.
survivalists and people who are building bunkers in their backyard,
Yes. Yes.
and how that was historically associated, one, with wealth, but also two, with kind of anti-government types. Don't trust the government. We have to protect ourselves against the government. And so there's a whole genre of people who believe in that. And so now it's kind of interesting to hear you talk about it, and that the panic and the response to said panic, that is a proliferation into kind of a more diverse set of political ideologies, people with different ideologies, right? And now thinking, well, if the shit is going to hit the fan, am I prepared? I mean, I think there was that movie years and years ago with Jodie Foster called Panic Room, I
I
think.
saw that. Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that's a
so
throwback. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then I just watched last year that Netflix series called Beef with Ali Wong, and one of the very wealthy people in that show has a panic room, and she lives up in like the Hollywood Hills or something. Um,
Hmm.
so it's certainly, I don't think it's a new concept for very wealthy people, but I mean, I do have kind of a ongoing rumble of anxiety that is like always there, but it hasn't led me to think about going to Costco and buying up a whole bunch of food or um
Hmm. Hmm.
getting stuff in order. I will say I do have my passport and other important documents in one place that I know where it is. If I needed to leave quickly, I could just grab it, easily accessible. And so
Hmm.
that's been something I've thought about more frequently recently.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So, so what I like about our thought processes, Lisa, is that I've been thinking from the perspective of how do I prepare to, as safely as possible, stay. You've at least thought about how safely you can leave. Oh, but I wouldn't suggest that that's far flung from what other folks are thinking too. I mean, I remember, during, the first 45 administration where there were social media groups that were formulating around,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you are soon to be a Black expat. This is how you do it based on what country you want to go to. And
Okay.
spreadsheets around these are the steps to take in case you want to leave and where you want to go and all these other things. And so that's not far flung, what you're mentioning. Like, Lisa, if I did not have my children and family here, then yeah, I would probably be sitting in your camp of where's my important document so I can get the hell up out of here, right? That to me makes complete sense. And I'm not in that situation. And so for those that aren't affluent and can't just up and go, what's the next best alternative? And so circling back to what my therapist was saying, she was saying that a lot of the folks that she's been talking to have tried to hang out in this controlled preparedness place,
Mm.
mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, even, um, so that they can at least feel some sort of control.
Mm-hmm.
So, I may not have any control over what's going on in the White House, but look, I got a whole linen closet full of toilet paper and paper towels. I will be fine. Like, literally, that's how people
Okay.
are mentally soothing themselves from what they can't control, which
Mm-hmm.
I think is fascinating. And so, for those that possibly, can't get a passport right now, or for whatever reasons they can't leave, what's their plan A, B, and C? Yeah, places like Costco, they're doing great right now, partially because of the Target boycotting, but for other reasons because people are stocking up on things. When it comes to some of these other things that are a little bit more pricey, you're right, it does fall in the line of what socioeconomic status you're in. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
going back to, our old faithful of intersectionality. I think your level of panic or preparedness connects to your identities. Some folks will, have to figure out what's the next best thing to leaving or something else that may be financially impossible for them in the moment.
Yeah, there's like an inverse relationship. So the degree to
Mm,
which you hold identities that are experiencing oppression just every day, but particularly right now,
mm-hmm,
your level of panic and anxiety and fear is going to be higher
mm-hmm,
than someone who
mm-hmm,
doesn't. And then also, we know that wealth is concentrated in groups of people that experience less identity based oppression, right? So the
mm-hmm,
people that have the funding to create the panic rooms, to leave the country, whether that's on commercial airline or private jet, right?
mm-hmm,
They are the folks
mm-hmm,
that are least threatened or least likely to
Yes.
be impacted by all of these changes and policies. So that inverse relationship is really interesting. And you just made me think of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't, I think I'm just really trying to stay grounded and not hyperbolic around the
Yeah.
situation. Um, but it feels like there are so many red flags and so many lines that have been crossed, and the degree to which barriers or checks and balances exist in this country have so utterly collapsed that
Yes.
I don't think it is an overreaction to be thinking about this, right? And so then to that
Yeah.
same degree, it's unsurprising to me, like you said right at the top of this phase, that in our
Mm-hmm.
capitalist system, that you've got people trying to make money off of this existential fear and panic that people are feeling. Um, and I think you have said this before on the podcast where um, the point at which the policies or the changes start to impact people's lives is when they start to sit up and go, oh, I didn't
Yes.
think they were
Yes.
talking
Yes.
about me, right? And so
Yes.
that's a trickle. It's like an ever increasing tide, and and
Mm-hmm.
everyone's standing in rows, and the tide just eventually gets to different people's feet as it moves up the beach, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that level of panic that people are feeling is moving from the most oppressed to the least oppressed, but it's still moving, right?
That's
Like,
right.
so
That's right.
so it's gonna get there, apart from a very small number of people who are probably going to ultimately always feel and experience immunity around this. But that is,
That's right.
and so I do wonder how this panic industry and the degree to which people are buying up um, supplies or
Mm-hmm.
installing panic rooms
Yeah.
or, doing other kind of proprietary things, how that is going to get bigger
Yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
the weeks tick on, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's no indication this is going to slow down. There's no indication it's going to get better. It just,
That's right.
the more we as a country acquiesce to the lawlessness, the
Mm-hmm.
more lawlessness there will be, because those
Yes.
boundaries are just falling away, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so I
No
think there's also going to
accountability.
be there's going to be like this upward trajectory, this upward line, like on a
Mm-hmm.
graph.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be interesting to watch that, I think, based on what you're saying here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And who gets touched and when, and what
That's
is the
right.
tipping point?
Yes. Yes. Well, and for some people, I think what's interesting now is that some people are already there. I'm thinking about Lisa, I think we brought this up in a previous episode. How many people left the country, the week after the election results came out?
Right.
I mean, and interesting number of folks that said, all right, I was plotting and planning during the entire election
Mm-hmm.
season. Depending on the outcome, I was prepared to get on a plane and not look back for a long while. And so it's not as if people aren't preparing, it's just the way, level, or degree to which they're thinking about this, right?
Yeah.
I must say, like I said, if I did not have children in my family here and I wasn't connected to a network of family and close friends here, I would have been one of those people that was plotting and planning all, it'd probably take a year or more to prepare to go elsewhere immediately following the election. That would have probably been me. But given that the constraints that
Yeah.
people may be considering, or there may be some folks that are like, to hell with it. Whatever happens, happens. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not denying the reality of it, but I'm not going to drive myself to, you know, having a small fit because I don't know what to do. Um, yeah, I'm people watching, Lisa. When
Yeah.
it comes to this topic, I'm people watching to see how folks respond. I think what's been most interesting for me to watch, actually, a demographic that we haven't brought up yet, Lisa, across socioeconomic status, race, sexual orientation, et cetera, It has been interesting to watch my veteran family and friends prepare.
Okay.
And some of the things that I've seen them prepare for are, I have to say, they're used to being prepared and if they need to be on the go, right? Like having a
Hmm.
go bag somewhere ready to go is just the life of a military person. So that's
Okay.
not that's not a stretch for them. But for example, depending on your role and your type of service, and if you saw any front lines at all, I have family and friends that are like, once I was discharged from the military, I don't care if I never saw a firearm again. And they've said this for years, decades. Now you're seeing gun ranges overflowing and people going to
Oh,
get their
interesting.
license to carry and so forth. And these are people that don't want it. They don't. I mean, I was talking to my uncle last week and a couple other friends and family that have served, men, women that have served our country that didn't want to have anything to do, like people that were hunters that aren't hunters anymore because of their military service and not wanting to be near firearms. And now they're like,
Mm.
I feel like I'm backed into a corner. I don't have a choice based on what our country is looking like right now. And so if I need to protect my family, my children, my loved ones from whatever, then I'm reverting back to skills that I have but wish I didn't need.
Interesting.
And I'm like,
Interesting.
oh, that is so fascinating. What I'm thinking specifically about my uncle that he served in Vietnam actually, and he said for decades, I don't want any firearms in my house. I don't want
Mm.
anything here at all. Well, now, which his son lives kind of in the compound, kind of across the yard from him. They all live in kind of a family compound. He's like, given where we are, I don't have a problem with it anymore. We got to do what we got to do at this point. And so the changes in behavior as I'm people watching is fascinating to me based on your identity group.
Yeah. And are they down in Virginia?
Yes. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
well, mostly in Virginia, some in Maryland, and others in Pennsylvania. So, yeah.
Yeah. I do think it's something. I mean, I don't know. I mean, so the firearm industry is probably going gangbusters, much like the panic industry. And so
Yes.
there's a
Yes.
larger kind of ethical, what does it mean to profit off of people's fear and panic, which was a question you posed
Mm-hmm.
right at the beginning, right? I think that is certainly
Mm-hmm.
something for us to consider, and it is profiting off of the fear and panic of people who are most vulnerable and most marginalized in our society, right? And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
rather than profiting off of that, how about you step up and try to slow the roll of the oppressor, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, that requires too much critical thinking, Lisa.
Yeah, and
Let's not do
good
that.
good dose of courage. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let's just get a lot of bags of rice and
Mm,
Clorox wipes and toilet paper and we'll be fine.
yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately. So, but I encourage people to, in my unprofessional, I play a therapist on TV opinion, Lisa. The only thing I would say is, I'm the type of person that kind of hangs out in that prepared area anyway. Like, if I don't
Hmm.
have this, and I think this is just part of growing up in the country and being able to live off the land and provide mostly for yourself when it comes to food and some of those basic needs, obviously. I already did some of that stuff anyway. And so I would just caution folks to think about not going completely into panic mode, but how to be a bit more intentional about being
Hmm.
prepared for certain things. So, if you're a person that needs to take medication, have a conversation with your doctor or with someone who, homeopathic remedies or any other alternatives for what you may need, have a conversation. I'm just encouraging people to have a conversation because I think I was listening to another podcast that said, now they said it much more crude than we're saying it here, Lisa, but they were saying, you're not pissed off about society and the situation. You're pissed off about your lack of preparedness for society and the situation. I was
Mm,
like,
that's
that might
interesting.
be a
Yeah.
little something because I'm pissed off with society. Let me go there. I'm still pissed off with society and politics and so forth, and we've got work to do there. But while that's being sorted out, what I do have control over is being prepared in certain ways. And so, how can we just think about preparedness here without going into
Yeah.
panic? So
Yeah. Yeah.
thanks, New York Times, for stressing us all
Yeah.
out for a few moments, right? But anyway, thanks for thinking it through with me, Lisa. That was a tough
Yeah,
one.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's jump into phase two here. Okay. So this isn't a whole lot better, but just a different angle.
Right, right,
um,
right.
so some of you may be familiar with the fact that the SAVE Act passed the House in early April. That is the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, which was originally introduced in 2024, didn't go anywhere. And then earlier this year, Trump issued an executive order related to elections that I think we have referenced on this pod before. And essentially, much of that prior bill and the executive order were then reintroduced as the SAVE Act. And it did indeed pass the House. Passed the House in, as I said, in early April by a 220 to 208 vote. So all Republican Congress people voted for it, all representatives, and 4 Democrats voted for it. So there's been a lot of anger at those 4 Democrats because the SAVE Act is predicated on the quote unquote reality that there are millions of non-citizens voting and election fraud is a huge issue that we need to stem the tide of. And so the only way to do that is through this federal legislation that really ratchets down people's capacity to vote. So obviously, we know those claims of voter fraud and non-citizen voting to be baseless. They are grounded in nothing. It is all just one big lie to bolster the current president's continued articulation that the 2020 election was stolen. But this bill, the reason why we wanted to talk about it is because it has real profound effects for a lot of people. So one of the key elements of a democracy, right, is the ability to vote, is that you, in our case, a representative democracy, you get to vote for people that then represent your interests in government. Like that's fundamental. And while the US Constitution doesn't actually enshrine an affirmative right to vote, it's still a fundamental component of what we understand to be representative democracy. So this darn act that is now at the Senate's doorstep could disenfranchise millions and millions of Americans, and it will do that in a number of ways. So it's related to registering to vote, right? So if you register to vote, you have to provide documentation that you are who you say you are. And you can't do that over the phone or over the internet. You have to physically go somewhere. And that documentation is limited to birth certificate, naturalization certificate, passport, and potentially a couple of other things. But that documentation has to match your name, your current name. So how many of you have birth certificates? One. I mean, we all have them, but how many of you know where your birth certificate is? One,
Right,
right?
right, right,
So I mean, mine is in the UK, I think.
right,
But
right.
for people who marry and take their partner's name, which is predominantly cisgender women, yep, your current name does not match your name on your birth certificate, right? So you would not, if you could find your birth certificate, Shauna would
Mm-hmm.
not be able to register to vote using her birth certificate because the 2 names do not match, right? So
Right,
that is
right.
a massive problem,
Mm-hmm.
particularly for married women, where the
Mm-hmm.
cultural convention is for the women, heterosexual women, to take
Mm-hmm.
the man's name in a marriage.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece is that you have to do
And
it in.
and
Oh, go
our
ahead.
LGBT folks and our LGBT folks that take each other's names and hyphenate as well.
Yeah, if
Let's
whatever,
add
yes.
them.
Yeah,
Whatever
so
change.
they're in there. Anyone that's changed their name, it's just disproportionately going to impact women. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
and then if
Mm-hmm.
you're living in a rural community and you have to provide your documents in person, you have to go to an election office or a DMV or whatever that ends up being, and
Mm-hmm.
the Center for American Progress tracked that in the 30 largest counties by area in the West, voters would have to drive an average of 260 miles to get to their election office to do that. So what if you don't have a
Yeah.
car, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, Lisa, when my parents had to go make some changes and so forth. It was not that extreme, but it was what, almost 23 miles away from home in
Yeah,
one direction.
right. So
Yeah.
public transportation is not going to transport you 260 miles. You may not even have any public transportation around there. You probably can't afford a taxi, and a taxi probably wouldn't do that. If you don't have a car, if you have a car, but you work and you have to be there in office hours and you don't have the luxury of taking vacation because maybe you're an hourly employee or something like that, right? You can't just take, I mean, 4 hours, that's actually conservative, 4 hours right there time at the
Right.
location and then 4 hours back. I mean, that's an entire day, if not 2 days, right? Based on the distance. So you've also got this potential impact on older communities in rural parts of the United States. The other option is you could show a passport. If you can get there, you can show a passport. But something like
If
21
you
million,
have one.
if you have one, 21 million people do not have a passport in the United States. That's the
Oh.
estimate.
Mm,
And
mm,
getting a
mm.
passport costs money. So folks who are on the lower end of the income who don't have a passport, and that's the only option that they could verify who they are, would have to apply for a
Mm-hmm.
passport, pay, I think it's like $170 to $200. You could expedite
Mm-hmm.
it, but that costs more money. And the time it takes for you to do all the stuff you need to get the passport, for them to create the passport and send it back to you, like that's weeks, right? So you may not have that amount of time given when voting registration deadlines are. So you have all of these actual citizens, millions of them, that could end up being
Hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hold up.
what?
Hold up.
Okay.
Hold up. Hold up. Whew. I have to take deep breaths to get through my
Okay.
anger here, Lisa. It's a vicious freaking cycle, Lisa, because they're saying show up with your birth certificate or your passport. If you don't have a birth certificate, you can't get registered. If you don't have a birth certificate in the United States, if you don't already have a passport, you can't get a passport also without a birth certificate. So both ways you're screwed.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that because I got my passport through my naturalization ceremony.
So in the
That was,
US with
yeah.
your DS-11, when you fill out your DS-11, you have to provide your two photos. Um, and then your proof of citizenship, which is usually birth certificate or a naturalization certificate. So
Okay.
if you don't have a birth certificate and you were born here, and even with maybe with a driver's license, let me look a little bit more, but I remember providing my birth certificate even to just renew.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So that's a great call
So
out
that's
there that, yeah,
cyclical.
that's
Yeah.
cyclical. Yeah. And
Let's
driver's
see
license
for
is not an acceptable form of identification for this register to voting. And I guess the Election Assistance Commission, between
hmm
2020 and 2022, 80 million Americans registered to vote or updated their registration. So when I moved last year from one county to another, I had to
Yeah,
re-register in the new county, right? So
right.
this is
Right.
not just affecting quote unquote new voters. This is going to be
That's right.
affecting people for any number of reasons might need to re-register or register
hmm
for the first time. And so
Right.
um, if you don't then have that documentation, or the documentation's name does not match your actual name because of what we already talked about, then
hmm
you're not going to be able to register to vote, and therefore you are going to be disenfranchised. Like the
hmm
fundamental component of any democracy is that citizens get to vote, and you're
hmm
going to be denied that, all under the premise that it's preventing non-citizens and fraudulent voting that doesn't
Doesn't
really exist.
exist.
And when it
hmm
does exist, it's usually caught, and we're talking like one person in a state or something. I mean, it's just, I can't, the percentage is just so low. And there is empirical document and research over and over again that shows this,
hmm
right? This isn't just
hmm
Lisa and Shauna with their
Right.
liberal bias saying that
Right.
voter fraud doesn't exist. Um,
Right.
So this just feels pretty awful to me. And because 4 Democrats voted for it, I have no effing idea why they did.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
this information that we're sharing with you all night right now is not new. This has been articulated in media. This was articulated in the House of Representatives when they were, and still people voted for it, knowing the consequences. In the Senate, it's going to need 60 votes to beat the filibuster, and there's 53 Republicans. Are going to need 7 or 8
Mm-hmm.
Democrats, which I think is a tall order. I don't think they're going to be able to get.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think it'll probably die in the Senate. But either way, and I'm thinking like on the heels of Mike Johnson in the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House, right, who killed that
Yeah.
rules change that would have allowed new parents to vote, proxy vote for 12 weeks after they became a new parent. And he basically
Mm-hmm.
tried to kill it and ultimately was
Yeah.
successful in doing so, even though he himself used proxy voting during the pandemic multiple times. And
Multiple
then
times.
now, when new parents, which is going to be predominantly women in this case, women legislators are asking for this option, it's now unconstitutional, right? So there's
Of course.
this running thread of policies that predominantly harm women, um,
Mm-hmm.
that are gaining traction and popularity and getting further and further along in the legislative process than I would
Mm-hmm.
like to see. I mean, obviously, it's more than the voting one is more than women, but
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
definitely disproportionately impacted.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm nosy, Lisa. The 4 Democrats that voted for this are Representatives Ed Case of Hawaii, Henry Cuellar of Texas, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Jared Golden of Maine, and Marie Gluesenkamp Perez of Washington State. So
Mm.
if you happen to be listening to this podcast,
Mm.
might want to reach out and let them know how you feel about it. I'm just saying, I'm
Yeah, and you
encouraging
should.
you
Yeah, you
to
should.
reach
And you
out.
should definitely get in touch with your senators and tell them to vote no
Absolutely.
on this, particularly if you
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the political affiliation of your state, you should get in touch with your senators
Yeah,
because
yeah.
um the fallout is going to be pretty monumental. And
Uh-huh.
then there's another piece of the bill that is less about you and I voting and more about the voting machines. And so the
Yes.
government's created new certification requirements and is going to require
For
every
the
state
machines.
to go back through
Mm.
this new certification requirement, of which none of the voting machines in the United States meet the requirements of this new process. And there's no money in the bill appropriated
Of
to
course not.
enable the states to update. So it's pushing states back to like paper and pencil, right?
Of
Because,
course.
of all the cheating that happens with voting machines, which is just,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ludicrous.
So
So,
what tickles me is that Jared Golden of Maine voted for this measure in particular, but Maine's own Secretary of State, Bellows, said that it's a quote, hasty power grab to allow politicians to choose their voters instead of
mm-hmm.
voters electing their politicians. And so, even within their own state, there is some very loud, powerful dissent with this. So, all this to say, get in contact with your senator, as Dr. Lisa mentioned, because this is look hugely, bigly problematic. And
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, look at how many people I'm going to say targets, how many
Yeah.
people it
Yeah.
targets to ensure that their voices are not heard. So yeah, Lisa, I appreciate that we made a note so long ago to remember to circle back on this because this was just voted, gosh, not even a week prior to recording this conversation. So pay attention to what's going on,
Yep.
y'all, and make
Yep.
sure you reach out to your designated politician. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's also targeting trans people too, right? Because
Of
their
course. Yes, yes,
name is not
yes.
going to match their birth certificate. So The other thing I will say is that voting
Exactly.
rights are just generally under attack. I don't know if you've been paying attention, Shauna, but
Yeah.
in North Carolina, I think it is, there was a judge that was elected and she won by like less than 1,000 votes, I think. And the
Hmm.
conservative judge that lost is challenging 60 something thousand votes that are all concentrated in Democratic counties, based on the fact that the voters verify didn't verify their signature or something with a driver's license or some other document, but the rule that they had that rule that voters had to do that when they were registering to vote came in after the election. So like the rule didn't even exist when
Yeah.
all these voters registered to vote and then subsequently voted for the Democrat or the liberal judge. And so now the conservative judge is challenging it and it's actually gotten traction. So now the court, I
Trying
think
to
in North Carolina,
retroactively.
the Supreme Court is saying that those 60 something thousand votes need to be quote unquote cured, which means they have to be checked. And so if a person who did the cast the vote, doesn't cure their ballot by providing
It
the
doesn't count.
documentation, they're going to throw it out. I mean, so there's literally that election for that Supreme Court position in North Carolina is going to be stolen. And it's just
Of
happening.
course. Of course, with no
Yeah.
challenge.
Right. I mean, that there are challenges, but they are not winning. Right.
They're
Like,
not
so
winning.
yeah. Yeah.
Retroactively curing a registered vote. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's really problematic. I might
Oh.
have some of the details wrong, so if that is piqued your
Mhm.
interest, you should go look it up. But that's happening right now. Yeah,
Oh, incredible, incredible. And Lisa, I always err kind of we're walking a tightrope here, Lisa, because on one hand, we're constantly in most episodes encouraging people to get involved, whether it's
yeah,
their vote or making their voice heard, and at the same time acknowledging how people are trying to work against the very system itself that we're encouraging you to participate in.
yeah,
We
yeah,
know
yeah,
that. We know that, y'all. For listeners, we
yeah.
know that, but don't let anybody silence you. That's our point.
Right,
Don't
right.
let anyone silence you despite the challenges. Don't let anyone silence you. Dr. Lisa did a great job several episodes ago laying out that actually there weren't more votes for 45, 47. It was just less overall and less for Kamala Harris. She laid it out beautifully. Given that, what that told us was
Right.
that fewer people are participating, which means that the larger general American public does not agree with the decision that was made because they weren't involved in the decision.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what we're saying. Okay, so don't let that discourage you from participation.
Right. 100%.
So, all right, y'all. Well, look, that is it for this episode. As we mentioned to y'all before, we are going deeper into 2 phases
Mm-hmm.
instead of our usual 3. So that's a wrap for this particular episode of Unfazed, Unedited. You can reach us on all of your social media platforms and podcast apps that you already use at Unfazed, Unedited with brackets around that first Unfazed, Unedited. You can email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com. Or you can visit our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access both the old and the new shows. So if you like this week's episode and you want to get people involved in speaking out on these particular topics, please subscribe, leave a review,
Mm-hmm.
share this with your friends, your coworkers, family members, or others in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next time.
All right. Until next time.